Welcome back to the channel. Today we are investigating one of the most dangerous financial bubbles of our time, one that's literally sinking while we watch. We're talking about the luxury coastal real estate market, where multi-million-dollar properties are being marketed as sound investments, even as scientific data tells us they're heading toward the ocean floor. The question we're asking today is simple but devastating. Are the prices you see today already obsolete? Do they reflect the reality of rising sea levels and intensifying storms, or are they built on a fantasy that's about to collapse? The coastal dream has defined wealth for centuries. A beachfront property represents the pinnacle of success, a status symbol, a safe investment, a legacy for future generations. But what happens when the very foundation of that dream becomes scientifically untenable? What happens when oceanfront becomes waterfront and then simply becomes water? We're about to dive deep into the data, the science, and the disturbing economic implications of what we're calling the coastal bubble. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, sea levels have risen approximately 8 to 9 inches since 1880, with the rate of increase accelerating significantly over the past 2 decades. The current rate stands at approximately 3.4 millimeters per year, nearly double the historical average. But this isn't uniformly distributed across coastlines. In some areas, like the mid-Atlantic coast, rates exceed 4.5 millimeters annually due to land subsidence combined with ocean rise. If current trends continue, we could see total sea level rise of 2 to 7 feet by 2100, depending on carbon emission scenarios. These aren't distant probabilities. They're mathematical certainties based on established physics. Water expands when it heats, and we're pumping unprecedented amounts of heat into our oceans. Glacier melt from Greenland and Antarctica adds direct water volume. This is happening now, in real time, and it's accelerating. Yet in 2024, beachfront properties in Miami, Los Angeles, and the Hamptons continue to command record prices. Why? Because the market hasn't truly priced in the reality of climate change. It operates on historical precedent rather than physics. The luxury real estate industry has developed an almost willful blindness to these trends. Agents market properties with vague mentions of potential future waterfront expansion, as if rising seas were an aesthetic enhancement. Developers construct buildings designed to last 50-70 years in locations that hydrological models suggest will face chronic flooding within 20-30 years. Insurance companies are beginning to abandon these coastal markets, but property prices remain inflated. This disconnect between risk and price is the very definition of a bubble. The wealthy who purchase these properties often possess the resources to adapt. They can install expensive flood mitigation systems, elevate structures, or simply maintain multiple residences and abandon the coastal ones when conditions deteriorate. The real damage falls on middle-class homeowners who bought in secondary coastal communities believing they were making prudent investments. They don't have the flexibility to walk away. They're trapped in depreciating assets that are simultaneously becoming uninsurable and unmortgageable. What we're witnessing is a quiet catastrophe, hidden behind glossy real estate marketing and price appreciation that exists primarily on paper. The fundamental thesis of coastal real estate investment, that these properties maintain or increase in value, is colliding with geological reality. This collision will redefine wealth inequality and regional economics across the developed world. But first, we need to understand exactly how deep this bubble runs. According to NOAA's technical documentation and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessments, several established mechanisms guarantee continued sea level rise, regardless of future emissions policies. Thermal expansion accounts for approximately 30 to 40% of current sea level rise. Warm water occupies more space than cold water. This is basic physics. As ocean temperatures continue rising, this effect compounds automatically. Glacial melt from mountain ranges worldwide contributes another significant component. The United States Geological Survey reports that glaciers worldwide have lost an average of 276 billion tons of ice annually since 2015. Greenland's ice sheet loses approximately 280 billion tons per year, while Antarctica loses roughly 150 billion tons annually. These aren't estimates. They're measured through satellite data from NASA and the European Space Agency. Each ton represents water that flows into the ocean and raises sea levels everywhere. But here's where the situation becomes genuinely alarming for coastal property markets. The loss is accelerating. The rate of Greenland ice loss has roughly tripled since the early 2000s. Antarctic ice loss has increased by a factor of 6 compared to the 1980s. We're not looking at a steady, manageable increase. We're looking at exponential acceleration. For property investors planning on 50-year holding periods, this matters immensely. The National Climate Assessment, released by the U.S. government in 2023, provides specific regional projections. The Mid-Atlantic region could experience sea level rise of 4.5 feet by 2100 under moderate emissions scenarios. The Gulf Coast faces similar threats. Even more immediately concerning, the assessment warns that chronic flooding from nuisance tidal flooding that occurs simply from high tides without any storms, will increase from current levels of roughly 10 days per year to 25-50 days annually in some coastal areas by 2050. That's within the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage. Properties in Miami Beach, perhaps the most iconic luxury coastal market, already experience chronic tidal flooding on roughly 10 days per year during king tides. The city has invested billions in seawalls and pump systems, yet flooding continues to worsen. The Miami Herald reports that despite these investments, some neighborhoods experience street flooding even during normal high tides. Properties that cost $15 to $25 million remain affected by this chronic flooding. This isn't theoretical future risk. It's present-day reality that hasn't yet significantly affected property valuations. Flood insurance has become another critical indicator of how poorly current prices reflect actual risk. The National Flood Insurance Program reports that coastal properties require flood insurance with premiums reflecting genuine actuarial risk assessment. Yet property values in Florida, Louisiana, and along the Atlantic coast remain elevated partly because buyers ignore or underestimate flood insurance costs in their investment calculations. They see a $5 million property with $20,000, $50,000 annual flood insurance premiums as acceptable. But across a 30-year mortgage, that represents $600,000 to $1.5 million in cumulative insurance costs, effectively a 12–30% increase in true ownership cost that rarely appears in promotional materials. The market has also been enabled by historically low interest rates and the assumption that property always increases in value. These conditions created unprecedented demand for coastal real estate from 2010–2022. Wealthy international buyers, viewing coastal property as a universal store of value, drove prices higher. But the underlying assumption that desirability and scarcity maintain prices ignores the possibility that entire categories of property could become less desirable due to environmental risk rather than economic recession. Satellite imagery and elevation mapping now provide unprecedented clarity about which properties face flooding risk. Zillow and other platforms can display flood risk assessments. Yet buyers often ignore this data. They see neighbors' properties selling at premium prices and assume the trend will continue indefinitely. But markets eventually confront reality. When they do, the repricing will be brutal. Insurance markets often recognize risks before general populations do. The coastal property market is currently experiencing crisis-level disruptions in insurance availability that represent an early warning system most observers are ignoring. According to the Insurance Information Institute, major insurers have pulled out of Florida, California, Louisiana, and other high-risk coastal areas. State Farm, which once covered millions of California properties, stopped writing new homeowners insurance policies in the state in 2023. In Florida, major carriers have exited the market, leaving the state-run insurer of last resort, Citizens Property Insurance, to cover roughly 1.4 million policies as of late 2024. This isn't a temporary market correction. This represents fundamental reassessment of coastal risk. Private insurers have access to the same hydrological data, storm modeling, and actuarial analysis showing accelerating climate impacts. They've concluded the risk no longer justifies the premium revenue from these properties. When private markets won't insure something at available premiums, it signals genuine economic unviability. Consider what happens when homeowners can't obtain affordable insurance. According to mortgage lending standards, properties must maintain adequate insurance or the mortgage becomes technically in default. Lenders can force borrowers into state-run insurance programs at dramatically higher costs. The mechanics here matter for understanding why this becomes a cascade. A property worth $10 million with $80,000 annual insurance, $50,000 in property taxes, and standard maintenance costs operates at $200,000 annually before considering financing costs. If insurance becomes unavailable or costs $150,000 annually, the property's economic model breaks. It no longer makes financial sense to hold it, even as a long-term investment. Forced sellers flood the market. Prices collapse rapidly once they start declining. We're seeing early versions of this story. According to reporting by Bloomberg and Reuters, some coastal property insurers have already experienced combined losses exceeding premiums in multiple years. They've responded by raising rates 20 to 50% annually and tightening coverage terms. Hurricane seasons in 2020, 2021, and 2023 produced massive insured losses, training insurers on the accelerating severity of coastal storms. Reinsurance, insurance for insurers, has become prohibitively expensive for many carriers. This creates a vicious cycle. As premiums rise, property values become economically stretched. The carrying costs approach rental market rates. When rental rates limit what tenants will pay, and maintenance costs keep climbing due to salt air corrosion and flood damage, margins compress. Properties that were previously acceptable investments become marginal. Marginal assets become undesirable. Undesirable assets eventually face value destruction. The insurance crisis also reveals something crucial about wealthy investors' behavior. They often don't directly feel the economic pain of rising costs. Ultra-high net worth individuals holding multiple properties don't scrutinize annual insurance costs the same way a middle-class homeowner does. They can absorb $150,000 in annual insurance increases. But this blind spot creates market inefficiency. When these properties eventually sell, new owners without comparable wealth face different economics. This transition moment, when expensive properties change hands from ultra-wealthy holders to merely wealthy ones, often precipitates market repricing. Lloyd's of London, the world's largest insurance marketplace, has already declared certain coastal properties essentially uninsurable at commercially viable rates. Some properties in extreme risk zones now cannot obtain coverage at any price. These are not marginal properties. They're premium beachfront real estate in desirable markets. When the world's most sophisticated insurance underwriters won't touch something, that's signal worth heeding. Yet property marketing continues largely unchanged. The insurance crisis has also produced a strange secondary market where desperate property owners band together into self-insurance pools or mutual insurance companies. Some high-net-worth associations have created private insurance cooperatives, but these are stopgaps, not solutions. When actual catastrophes occur, self-insurance pools often prove inadequate. Properties remain damaged, uninsured losses mount, and values crater as properties become damaged assets with financing still attached. Climate science has established with high confidence that hurricane intensity will increase with ocean warming, even if the total number of hurricanes doesn't change significantly. The physics is straightforward. Warmer ocean water provides more energy to fuel storm intensity. The National Hurricane Center, examining historical data, finds that the proportion of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes has increased as ocean temperatures have risen. Hurricane Harvey, 2017, Hurricane Irma, 2017, Hurricane Maria, 2017, and Hurricane Ian, 2022, all produced record or near-record rainfall and storm surge in their respective regions. Hurricane Ian provides a specific case study. In 2022, this Category 4 hurricane caused an estimated $112.9 billion in damage across Florida and other southeastern states, making it the deadliest and most destructive hurricane of 2022. But more significantly for understanding coastal property risk, it demonstrated how quickly extreme events can destroy property value. Communities directly in Ian's path experienced not just physical damage but psychological damage. The realization that these events can happen is now personal and recent, not distant and theoretical. After Ian made landfall in southwest Florida, property assessments in the affected areas plummeted, not because of immediate physical damage alone, but because buyers' risk calculus fundamentally changed. Properties that survived with moderate damage nonetheless lost 20 to 40% of their value as the market repriced for increased storm risk. This is crucial. Psychological acceptance of risk often precipitates more severe repricing than the actual physical damage justifies. We can examine research from Wharton School of Business and other institutions studying hurricane impacts on property values. Studies consistently show that coastal property values decline 5–20% immediately following major hurricanes, with recovery occurring only gradually if surrounding development remains strong. But this data is based on historical hurricane frequency. If hurricane severity continues increasing, and storms that were once 50–100-year events become 20–30-year events, historical recovery patterns become unreliable. More concerning, individual hurricanes can trigger broader market reassessments. Hurricane Katrina 2005 didn't just cause local damage, it fundamentally altered national perception of coastal risk. Property values in affected regions declined for years. More significantly, it changed investor behavior. Money that previously flowed into coastal real estate began diversifying away. The same psychological shift could happen nationally if major hurricanes strike prominent wealthy coastal markets in succession. We are now seeing increased frequency of what meteorologists call rapid intensification, hurricanes that dramatically increase in strength within 24–48 hours. Hurricane Otis in 2023 intensified from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane in just 24 hours before striking Mexico. This challenges the assumption that warnings provide adequate preparation time. Properties can experience more severe impacts than communities prepared for. Storm surge represents the most destructive component of hurricanes for coastal real estate. A Category 4 hurricane can produce storm surge of 13–18 feet above normal tide level. Combined with normal high tide and waves riding on top of that surge, total water heights can exceed 25 feet. The numerical models predicting storm surge have improved, but the fundamental vulnerability remains. Properties built at sea level cannot be protected by conventional means once storm surge exceeds certain thresholds. Seawalls and other hardening structures help temporarily, but they create their own problems. They're expensive, often millions for individual properties or blocks. They require constant maintenance and repair. During major storms, they sometimes fail catastrophically. They also prevent natural beach migration, which eventually results in complete erosion in adjacent areas. Properties that invested in seawalls sometimes become islands, surrounded by eroded neighboring land. The accelerating intensity of storms matters enormously for property insurance models. Insurance rates are based on historical loss data. But if the historical period, roughly 1970–2010, had systematically lower storm intensity than the period ahead, 2020–2050, then current insurance pricing dramatically underestimates actual risk. Early evidence suggests this is occurring. Insurers are raising rates faster than normal inflation, suggesting they're already adjusting models upward. Understanding why rational investors continue purchasing overpriced coastal real estate, despite clear scientific warnings, requires examining the behavioral and structural factors that perpetuate the bubble. First is the simple reality that real estate markets have historically been reliable wealth stores. Over the past 50 years, coastal property has generally appreciated. This long-term trend creates powerful psychological anchoring. Investors see past appreciation and extrapolate it forward, dismissing climate science as exaggerated or distant. Second, there's a measurement problem. Most real estate investors don't regularly conduct rigorous asset valuation, including all operating costs. They focus on purchase price and sale price, ignoring or underestimating ongoing expenses. A property purchased at $5 million and sold 5 years later at $6 million looks like a successful investment. But if that same property required $100,000 annually in flood insurance, $50,000 in hurricane damage repairs, and endless maintenance from salt air corrosion, the true return rate becomes marginal. Most investors don't calculate this holistically. Third, ultra-high net worth individuals often view these properties through a different lens than traditional investments. They're viewed as lifestyle assets, status symbols, and diversification vehicles rather than purely financial investments. Fourth, the coastal real estate market lacks transparency and efficiency in ways that other markets have moved beyond. There's no real-time pricing, limited comparable data, and significant information asymmetries. Real estate agents have incentives to emphasize positive factors and downplay risks. Marketing materials routinely omit flood insurance costs, climate vulnerability, or insurance availability problems. Buyers rely on these biased information sources rather than independent analysis. Fifth, there's political and financial incentive to maintain the bubble. Real estate represents roughly 35% of global wealth. Coastal property might represent 10–15% of that. Trillions in mortgage debt are backed by coastal property. Banks, government agencies, and developers all have incentives to maintain the illusion that prices reflect accurate value. Acknowledging the bubble means acknowledging massive financial losses for major institutions. So the machinery of finance and politics largely stays silent about the problem. Sixth, many investors employ what might be called adaptation optimism. They believe that future technological or engineering solutions will solve the sea level rise problem. They envision seawalls, levees, pumping systems, and other engineered solutions protecting their investments indefinitely. While adaptation measures certainly help, they have limits. You cannot prevent sea level rise with engineering. You can only delay or partially mitigate its effects. Properties can be elevated and flood-proofed, but at costs that eat into investment returns substantially. Seventh, there's the issue of temporal horizons. Many ultra-wealthy coastal property owners may not personally experience the worst effects. If you purchase property at age 50 with an expectation of 30 years of enjoyment, the catastrophic impacts arriving in 40–50 years might never directly affect you. This creates misalignment between timeframes. Individual property owners operate on 20 to 50-year horizons, but climate impacts operate on 50, 150-year horizons. Additionally, the rental market often masks underlying economic problems with coastal property. Premium locations can still command high rents despite increasing environmental stress. A $10 million Miami Beach property might rent for $50,000–, $100,000 monthly, offsetting significant carrying costs. This rental income supports property values artificially. Investors see rental returns and conclude the property remains sound. But rental demand could evaporate quickly if neighborhoods become marked as chronically flood-prone, or if insurance costs make rental rates unaffordable for tenants. The financial industry has also created structures that further misalign incentives. Mortgage-backed securities, real estate investment trusts, and other packaged properties remove lenders from direct exposure to individual property risk. A bank that originates a mortgage immediately sells it to secondary markets. The originating bank bears no risk if the property becomes worthless. The incentive structure encourages loose lending and perpetuates inflated valuations. This pattern repeated with disastrous consequences in 2008. We're witnessing similar dynamics now in coastal markets. While most casual observers miss the coastal bubble, sophisticated investors have begun quietly repositioning. Several specific market signals indicate early-stage repricing is occurring in segments of the coastal real estate market, even if prices remain elevated in prime waterfront addresses. Understanding these signals helps predict where broader repricing will spread. In flood-prone areas of Florida, Louisiana, and parts of the Northeast, property appreciation rates have slowed dramatically compared to broader real estate markets. From 2020–2024, while overall median home prices in the United States increased approximately 35%, some coastal Florida communities saw appreciation of only 5–15% or complete stagnation. This divergence is significant. If coastal location provided meaningful value, we'd expect coastal properties to appreciate faster than inland properties, not slower. According to real estate market analysis, the decline in relative appreciation rates has accelerated as hurricane seasons have intensified and insurance problems have become more prominent. In 2023–2024, some coastal properties actually experienced price declines while inland markets remained stable. This is the first signal of repricing. It suggests that marginal buyers and investors are beginning to exit the market. Days on market for coastal properties has also increased noticeably in secondary coastal communities. Properties that previously sold within weeks in 2019-2020 now require months to find buyers. This indicates demand has shifted. It's not that coastal properties are unsellable, it's that fewer investors view them as strategic purchases relative to other available investments. This behavioral shift precedes price declines. Transaction volume provides another signal. Real estate transaction counts in some high-risk coastal areas have declined 20 to 40% compared to pre-pandemic levels, even as total transaction volume nationally remains steady or increased. Lower transaction volume means less price discovery. When fewer transactions occur, prices can become increasingly disconnected from true market valuations. This creates conditions for sudden repricing when larger transactions eventually occur. Demographics also matter. Younger, wealthy investors entering the property market for the first time often show more climate awareness than previous generations. They're less likely to purchase in extreme-risk coastal locations. Instead, they're buying in secondary cities and inland locations. This demographic shift gradually changes who holds coastal property. Older, wealthier, less likely to sell, more willing to absorb losses. Eventually, these holders age out and properties transfer to heirs or to forced liquidation. That transition moment often includes repricing. Insurance data provides particularly clear early signals. Markets experiencing the fastest rising insurance costs show correlated declines in property valuations and transaction activity. Properties in the worst affected areas are already experiencing this. In some parts of South Florida, insurance costs have risen 200–400% over 5 years. Properties facing these costs are beginning to show price weakness relative to nearby properties with better insurance availability. Spatially precise repricing is occurring even before broad market recognition of the problem. The rental market has also begun showing stress in extreme risk areas. While premium locations maintain high rents, secondary coastal properties that face chronic flooding are becoming harder to rent at profitable rates. Landlords report longer vacancy periods and increased maintenance costs eating into returns. These properties are beginning to be sold off as owners accept that rental income no longer justifies ownership costs. These forced sales suppress prices in these areas. Wealth management advisors have quietly begun steering clients away from marginal coastal properties. Several major wealth advisory firms have published internal guidance recommending clients diversify away from extreme-risk coastal real estate. While they maintain optimistic public positions, because many serve real estate clients, private conversations reveal changed positioning. Sophisticated money is quietly redeploying. Assessment of property vulnerability mapping has also affected pricing. Properties classified as high risk or extreme risk on flood mapping tools have experienced more severe price declines than properties classified as moderate or low risk, even within the same neighborhoods. As property assessments become more sophisticated and accessible, buyers increasingly account for specific risk levels. This is creating micro-repricing within markets, some properties holding value while adjacent ones decline. These signals remain localized and inconsistent across markets. In ultra-premium segments where buyers prioritize status over financial returns, prices remain firm. But in middle-market coastal segments where financial returns matter more, repricing has begun. This pattern will gradually spread up market as more capital re-examines coastal investments. When the coastal real estate bubble deflates, and the question is no longer if but when, the financial consequences will reshape wealth distribution, regional economics, and investment markets globally. Understanding the scale of potential repricing requires examining current market capitalization of coastal real estate and the leverage built upon it. According to various estimates, coastal properties in the United States alone represent roughly $4–7 trillion in real estate value. This represents approximately 15 to 20% of total U.S. real estate value. Of this, roughly 30–40% is mortgaged, representing $1.2–2.8 trillion in mortgage debt. Additionally, mortgage-backed securities backed by coastal properties are embedded throughout investment portfolios globally. Pension funds, insurance companies, mutual funds, and institutional investors hold them as supposedly safe assets. If coastal property values decline 30 to 50% over the next 10–20 years, which hydrological models suggest is plausible for extreme risk properties, This would represent $1.2 to $3.5 trillion in wealth destruction in the US alone. Comparable destruction would occur in coastal markets globally. Europe, Asia, Australia, and other regions face similar climate impacts. Global wealth destruction from coastal real estate repricing could reach $10 to $20 trillion. This would constitute one of the largest asset bubble collapses in history, dwarfing the 2008 mortgage crisis in scale. But the impact distribution would be different. In 2008, losses concentrated in financial institutions and lower-income homeowners who bought at peak prices. Coastal repricing will devastate ultra-wealthy property holders and institutional portfolios, but the psychological and political effects could be even more severe because wealthy investors believe their assets are safe. The mortgage-backed securities problem creates systemic risk. If coastal properties experience mass value destruction, mortgage-backed securities backed by these properties will default at elevated rates. Institutions holding these securities will face unexpected losses. Insurance companies holding mortgage-backed securities face particular risks. They'll experience simultaneous losses from property damage claims and mortgage-backed security defaults. This creates potential for domino failures across financial systems. Pension funds and retirement portfolios that hold real estate investment trusts focused on coastal properties will face value destruction. This affects retirement security for millions of people who never directly purchased coastal property, but hold it indirectly through their retirement portfolios. The political and social consequences of pension losses could be severe. Regional economies dependent on coastal property values will experience multiplier effects. Property tax revenues will decline as valuations fall. Local governments will face budget crises. Construction and real estate employment will contract. Communities built on the assumption of perpetual coastal property appreciation will face economic stress. The repricing also creates profound inequality implications. Ultra-wealthy property holders can absorb losses by liquidating diversified portfolios. Upper-middle-class coastal property owners cannot. They'll face underwater mortgages, forced sales, and financial devastation. This accelerates wealth concentration, not wealth redistribution. The rich absorb losses and redeploy capital. The middle class faces bankruptcy and exclusion from future property markets. Insurance industry consolidation will accelerate as losses mount. We'll likely see major insurance companies exit the U.S. market or require government bailouts. Flood insurance will likely become primarily a government function. This socializes losses. Taxpayers across the entire country subsidize insurance costs for coastal property owners. This represents hidden wealth transfer from non-coastal populations to coastal property holders. Adaptation measures will require massive capital investment. Seawalls, levees, elevated infrastructure, and other engineering solutions will cost hundreds of billions to trillions. Debates about who pays these costs, property owners, local governments, national governments, or insurance pools, will become increasingly contentious. Some regions will adapt successfully and retain value. Others will face abandonment as adaptation costs prove economically unjustifiable. Climate migration will accelerate as coastal areas become less desirable. Population flows will redirect toward inland cities, second-tier metropolitan areas, and climate-stable regions. This will create economic opportunity in receiving areas but severe stress in sending areas. Coastal communities face potential decades of stagnation, outmigration, and economic difficulty. Government response remains uncertain but likely inadequate. Some governments may implement regulatory measures to accelerate managed retreat, discouraging development in extreme risk zones, reducing insurance availability, or increasing building standards. These measures typically occur only after major crises precipitate them. They come too late to prevent the repricing, but might accelerate it once implemented. The international implications are substantial. Coastal property serves as a store of value for global capital flows. As investor confidence declines, capital will redirect toward alternative investments in geographic locations. Developing nations with significant coastal real estate holdings face particular vulnerability. They cannot adapt as wealthy nations might. Ultimately, the coastal bubble represents the market's failure to price in climate risk until the risk becomes impossible to ignore. When that reckoning occurs, repricing will be severe, sudden, and economically disruptive. The investors who began moving capital away from coastal markets 5 to 10 years before the crisis fully manifests will emerge with preserved wealth. Those who remain anchored to the old assumption that coastal property always appreciates will experience generational wealth destruction. The question for viewers is not whether repricing will occur, but whether you're positioned ahead of it or will be surprised by it.